All right, HR in the global context. Let's talk about it. First, let's talk a little bit about how globalization began. So I just talked to you a little bit about having the global mindset and making sure that we consider the global mindset as one of our HR competencies. But there are a couple of things that happen as to how globalization even began. As we can look from the slide, it sort of details Apple in 1984 being one of the landmarks in personal computing. It made computers accessible to ordinary people. It later contributed globalization by enabling more people to connect and communicate across borders. The first internet page in 1991, it marked the public beginning of what we know today as the World Wide Web, and it became the backbone of modern globalization. It drastically lowered the cost of communication, and it allowed instant connectivity across the globe. This alone transformed the way people communicated, how information was shared, and how business actually operated. NAFTA, this was a trade agreement between Canada, the US, and Mexico, and it eliminated most tariffs and trade barriers between the three countries. This led to a significant increase in trade and economic integration in North America. So as you can see, globalization has been happening for some 30, 40 plus years at this point. When we think about the definition of globalization, I told you that it's this multifaceted, complex phenomenon that refers to the increasing integration and interconnectivity or interconnection of countries, economies, societies, and cultures around the world. Globalization, it changes the way we see the world around us and how we interact with all of the dynamic forces. There are a couple of different aspects of defining globalization that includes economic integration, technological connectivity, cultural exchange, political changes, the migration and movement of people. These are all things that sort of fit into this multifaceted phenomenon and integration and connectedness of people, countries, economies, and societies around the world. And when we think about connections in the globalized world and the way businesses change, you as an HR practitioner, you have to be able to discern between large scale forces and trends and micro level changes that occur quickly and may be more transient. So what do we mean by this? Those large scale forces and trends, these include things like broad societal, economic, political, and technological changes that may affect the way a business does its work over a long period of time. So I want you to think about demographic shifts, aging populations. This might have a significant impact on labor markets in HR. I want you to think about technological advances. With the rise of AI, automation, and digital transformation, the skills that are needed in the workforce may impact how we do business. Globalization and economic changes. I want you to think about just what's happening in the economic environment. At one time, the economic environment was booming and everybody was moving around. At other times, it slows down, and this may impact how we acquire talent. So you have to make sure that you pay attention to, what's happening in the globalized world. When we think about those, the slide talks about those immediate events or trendy phenomenons. These are things that are like sudden changes or fads that can have an immediate impact on the org, but they're not long lasting. So fluctuations in the market, I just told you, sometimes the market change, regulatory changes, immediate changes in labor laws or immigration laws, hot jobs. So there might be a demand for jobs or roles that can surge rapidly due to industry trends. Viral social media trends. Drop a 6 in the chat if you've ever seen any of these viral social media trends. These can tend to drive trends in culture, but they may not always be sustainable in the long run. So I want you to think about an organization who might sell these different color pencils, and imagine that there's a trend on TikTok or Facebook or Instagram or whatever is happening today, whatever social media platform is popular today. And all of a sudden, this organization bases their entire market share or their entire revenue stream on this sort of trend that we know will die out slowly, okay, or die out quickly over time. People have a very short attention span nowadays. So one moment we pick up something, the next moment we're off to something else. So this is what we mean by being aware of those trendy things. As an HR practitioner, you essentially have to be able to respond to these immediate events and trends quickly to be able to remain flexibility. But you also have to be careful as not to overreact and base everything on it, because it will cause you to lose sight of your long-term goals. So we just have to be balanced, taking a balanced approach to help us contribute to the organization's success. Now, there are a couple of forces that will shape globalization. These are things like foreign direct investment, again, the economy of the demographics. So as younger people are moving into the workforce, we also see more and more younger people who are preferring entrepreneurship over working a traditional role, or reverse innovation. These are all things that might help shape globalization or your globalization strategy. Some other things that might help shape your global strategy are things like hyperconnectivity. So I talked to you about Apple and them introducing that computer in 1984. We are constantly connected. This allows us to move faster, further, quicker. All of those things, that hyperconnectivity helps us to globalize, and it gives us this 24/7 global workplace, because we can use this around the sun model. You have people in the US working a certain time frame, and the people in the US working, or India working while the folks in the US are sleeping, and vice versa. So those are the things that also help us hyperconnectivity. When it comes to your role in HR and your role of global HR, it is critical in supporting an organization that operates across multiple countries or have a diverse workforce. You're responsible for aligning HR policies, practices, procedures, strategies with the organization's international goals and objectives. And as you can see from the slide, some of the key roles and responsibilities you might have is aligning the processes and activities with that strategy, helping to create the global strategy. How are we going to acquire talent? How are we going to develop the talent? How are we going to maintain competitive from a benefits and compensation standpoint in other countries where we don't know anything about their compensation structure? And how are we going to adapt to the cultural and legal context of each of those locations that we are in? The next slide talks about pull and push factors. If you're taking notes, you should be taking notes. These things are relative to globalization, and they refer to the various elements that either encourage or disencourage businesses, people, and countries from participating or engaging in a globalized world. So for push factors, these are the things that might push them to participate, right? These are things like the saturation of local markets. So a saturated domestic market can push businesses to seek new higher markets internationally. So for example, if a market is oversaturated in the US, it might push this US-based company to another country where that market is not as saturated, and they can grab more of that market share. So when you see organizations expanding into other countries, I want you to look at what's happening here in the US. There might be intense competition in the local market here in the US that can encourage businesses to seek less competitive markets in other places. Also, there might be push factors such as increased cost or lack of employment opportunities. Pull factors might be things like better standards of living, the need for educational opportunities, higher quality institutions, things like that. So these are all things that might pull or push an organization toward or away from globalization. If you're taking notes, drop a 4 in the chat. This should be in your notes. Promoters headquarters orientation. This is also known as his EPRG framework. And basically what this is it classifies the way in which companies orient themselves and organize themselves internationally. So this acronym, it stands for ethnocentric, polycentric, regiocentric, and geocentric. There is a complex concept video in the portal on this topic, so I want you to make sure that you go and watch it. In an ethnocentric orientation, this is where the company or the home country culture dominates the decision-making and operations. The headquarters in the whole home country, they hold significant control over all of the subsidiaries. And often expatriates from the home country are in like key positions. So I want you to think of an American company that's expanding to Europe, but they continue to apply American management styles, and they mostly hire or assign American managers to run their European operations. Drop a 3 in the chat if you're tracking with me. Polycentric. This is where the organization might recognize and respect the differences between the home and the host country. The subsidiaries are often given a little bit more autonomy, and they are managed by local staff. So I want you to imagine a European country that has subsidiaries in Asia might allow the Asian branches to adapt products and practices that fit the local taste and their preference. Regiocentric is somewhat of a blend between polycentric and ethnocentric. So each region has a certain degree of autonomy in decision-making, but the company might see some similarities between a particular region. So they might tend to group countries within those regions together for organizational purposes. And then geocentric. This is where a company might adopt a global approach to its operations. It might seek to integrate and coordinate the strategies and practice across all of its international operations. It values diversity, and they seek the best solutions regardless of whether they are found in the home country or the host country. So I want you to imagine a global tech company that sources talent and expertise from across its international operations to develop products and services for the global market. So each of these different orientations, they may be effective depending on the various factors or the nature of that particular business, okay? Oftentimes a geocentric approach, so that approach where we take a global approach to the to operations, it's often considered to be a little bit more progressive and adaptable to the global environment. Now let's talk about global integration. This is an approach that multinational companies or organizations adopt when they are aiming to create a consistent and unified presence across different countries. It's a key concept in global strategy, and it forms one half of the integration responsiveness framework, with the other half, and we're going to talk about it next, being local responsiveness. So basically, we are looking at developing a consistent and unified presence across different countries. I don't want you to get sort of overwhelmed by these slides when we're talking about global and the global mindset, especially if you don't work in a global company. And I also want to make a note here that if you are taking the PHR or the SPHR, you will not see a lot of global questions on your exam, because those questions are reserved for the GPHR, the Global Professional and Human Resources. If you are taking the SHRM or the SHRM-SCP, you will see some of these questions on your exam. So it's important that you tune in to this aspect of our learning. Now, the other half I mentioned was local responsiveness. This is a strategy where a multinational company adapts its products, services, and business practices to fit the local market, their preferences, and the cultural norms, okay? So again, I told you in global integration that global integration was all about taking a consistent approach. In local responsiveness is about tailoring to adapt to that particular area. I want you to think about McDonald's. McDonald's might adapt their menu to local taste in different countries. So they might offer things like the Mac Arabia in Middle East, or the McHaramac in India, okay? So they are essentially adapting to that location. Drop an 8 in the chat if you're tracking with me. Now we have the global responsiveness, local or global integration, local responsiveness matrix. This is also known as the integration responsiveness grid or the IR grid, as you can see from the slide. The matrix essentially has two dimensions: global integration and local responsiveness, which we just talked about. There's also 4 quadrants of this matrix as well. It's the global strategy, the transnational strategy, the multi-domestic strategy, and the international strategy. I won't go into complete detail about those, but I'll just kind of cover high level with the global strategy. This is where companies, again, they adopt a unified approach. Examples might include companies like Intel or Microsoft. With the transnational strategy, companies seek both global efficiency and local responsiveness. So they are trying to integrate worldwide operations, but they're also flexible enough to respond to the local market dynamics. Multi-domestic strategy. This is where companies highly customize their offerings and operations to the local market. And they have a high degree of decentralization. So they are focusing on adapting to local customer preferences. I want you to think about the example that I gave you with McDonald's. And then the international strategy as well. They primarily operate in their domestic market, and they have some degree of overseas presence.